Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 28th edition of Crop Talk. And this week we're going to, I guess, not talk a lot about this year's harvest, but we're going to start talking about planning for next year. And it's that time of year when a lot of producers are looking at winter wheat and fall rye, I guess. And I just thought it would be a good opportunity to maybe give a little bit of a refresher to those people that are planning on planting some fall rye this year, or even people working with producers that are going to be looking at growing winter wheat this year. So it's one of those things that you just think is you get out there with the drill and away you go. But I think there's a lot more things that we should be looking at, because it is a crop that can produce a lot of income for producers. And I've talked to a few producers this past week, and they're looking at spreading out their harvest because as you get more acres, you try to also manage your harvesting time and your seeding time. So it's definitely a management tool, whether it be for spreading out your income to spreading out your time. So I guess with that, I'd like to welcome today Alex Griffiths to the webinar, and he's the agrologist for Ducks Unlimited, and he's going to give us a presentation on planning for our 2025 winter wheat crop. So Alex, if you wanted to take it away, we'll get started.
Perfect. Thanks, Lionel. Let me know when you can start seeing my screen here, and then I'll get it in presenting. Ooh. How's that looking?
That looks good.
Perfect. Alrighty. So thanks for having me on there, Lionel. As you mentioned, I'm Alex Griffiths, agrologist with Ducks Unlimited, and today I'll talk about planning for the 2025 winter wheat crop. I'll start it off with a recap of 2024 now that things are mostly harvested, and then get into variety selection, as there's many new varieties that have come to market in the last couple of years and are looking pretty promising. And then get into some seeding info, your stubbles, rate, date, and depth, and then a bit of fertility, including some research that we're doing at the diversification centers in the province. So to start off, it ended up being a very low winter kill year with just a pretty mild winter, leading to minimal winter kill. Of the fields that I scouted, there was only 3 that I knew of that were reseeded, and all of them were seeded late or deep or into like a sprayed out hay stubble, none of which are completely conducive to good survival. And I wanted to mention that it always seems when assessing a field coming out of winter, you really need to be very patient, as this field, as you can see on the left in April 11th here, doesn't look amazing, but then fast forward a month, by mid-May, it looks excellent. And I was talking with the producer the other day, it ended up averaging 85 bushels across the half section. So just need to be patient about how it looks coming out of winter. Here was another field that I was looking at. This one was wildfire that was seeded September 30th, which is the last possible day of crop insurance, and into pea stubble. And this is taken from probably one of the worst spots on the field, which is just a gravel hilltop. And it's still actually ended up having half decent survival, even with low snow cover and very coarse soil. This was pretty impressive, as it's kind of one of the worst spots on the field that you'd expect to see. And you can kind of see in the background and on the edges of the photo that the rest of the field survived very well. So it did quite good. And I briefly just wanted to mention how to assess winter survival. I always use plants per square foot, and ideally you want to be between 20 and 30 plants per square foot. But even if you drop as low as about 13 plants per square foot, you can still be ending up with around 90% of the expected yield of the field, which is pretty crazy considering you're losing half of the plants that were seeded. A great way to figure this out early in the year before it starts greening up is with a bag test, which is what I have a picture of on the right here. And with this, you basically take some plants, you clip off the old leaves and the old roots, and then you just put the crown in a wet paper towel in a Ziploc bag that's filled with air. And then after a couple of days, you should see those crowns regrow green leaves or sometimes some nice bright white roots coming from the crown. And any of the winter killed crowns, like this red circled one here, will very quickly shrivel up and start to darken. And that is how you can tell that it didn't survive the winter. But in this situation of these 10 or 12 plants that I took here, there was only one that winter killed. And I talked with this producer earlier this week, and he said the field that this came from ended up yielding 90 bushels to the acre. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that usually around that 7 or 8 plants per square foot is when most fields end up getting reseeded. But if you do end up in a situation where, say, it's way too wet or you've got lots of other seeding to do and you end up leaving it to grow, you might actually be surprised by how a low plant stand like that yields, with even unexpected about 80% of yield there, because winter cereals have a great ability to tiller and take up space. So after surviving the winter, the spring was extremely wet, with many areas getting close to a foot of rain in the months of May and June. This was a winter wheat field on May 22nd that I was looking at, with a low spot that was seeded through in the fall completely full of water. And this was a pretty common sight in most fields this year, as these areas, even if they were able to survive the winter, they couldn't survive multiple weeks underwater when you just get 12 inches of rain in a 2-month span like that. And then taking that a step further, here's the percent of normal precipitation and percent of normal growing degree day maps for the province from May 1st to early June. Nearly the entire province, that is that dark bluish green color, that is over 150% of normal moisture for that time of year. And then it was also a very cool spring with these light blue colors on the map on the right, showing that it was around 90% or less of normal growing degree days for the majority of the province, other than the Far East and the Interlake regions. And with lots of moisture and cooler temperatures, there was lots of leaf disease present, such as tan spot. Tan spot requires about 6 hours of leaf wetness for infection and temperatures around 15 to 28 degrees, which pretty much describes those early spring months of May and June. And in winter wheat, a large portion of yield comes from your penultimate and your flag leaves. So as a result, there was quite a few flag leaf fungicide timings as people were trying to keep those flag leaves healthy and green for as long as they possibly could. And then going to head timing, this slide shows the Fusarium head blight risk map that Paul Bullock and the University of Manitoba developed. This was a screenshot of June 24th, and it stayed at this risk level for more than 3 weeks. And honestly, the week prior, it was pretty high risk as well. Fusarium head blight likes high humidity, which all of this moisture helped cause, and temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius, which once you got to about that last week of June and into July, we started getting those hotter temperatures. Because winter wheat flowers early, it can often escape the worst infection periods compared to a hard red spring wheat, but this year it was still troublesome, and most fields I know were sprayed with fungicide at head timing. Overall, once the combine started rolling, you could tell it was a very good year. I've heard many producers harvesting above average yields, anywhere from 55 to 100 bushels to the acre, with lots falling around that 80 to 90 bushels per acre. And many people talking about areas of their field where the yield monitor hit 120 or 140 or 180 if you were crazy lucky. And if yields like this can continue to become the new normal for winter wheat, and our September weather cooperates for seeding and harvest, then there should be plenty more acres coming in the future years. I always like to mention this, even though it's a little late for any winter cereals right now, but can't stress how important pre-harvest info is. Make sure before you go and desiccate your fields to check the greenest parts of the field, like where that red arrow is pointing, pass the thumbnail test and are less than 30% seed moisture. This will just help keep the crop saleable in all export markets. And also don't be afraid to leave these areas to harvest separately, as they're likely higher yielding to begin with and just need a little extra time for those tillers to fill out. I briefly wanted to mention acreage of winter cereals in Manitoba. Currently, there's 66,000 acres of fall rye and nearly 43,000 acres of winter wheat in the ground in Manitoba. 2023 was the most fall rye ever seeded, or sorry, 2022, with 164,000 acres. And winter wheat peaked at 600,000 acres in 2008 and 2013. With how well the year has gone for both of these crops, I'd expect interest for seeding this fall to be high and these acreages to increase for 2025. So getting into winter wheat varieties, it's a very exciting time with many new high-yielding, winter-hardy, and disease-resistant varieties that are all available. This chart was taken from MASC's variety market share reports in 2021 and 2023. And in 2021, you can see that Emerson, Gateway, and Elevate made up about 83% of the total acreage. And just 2 years later, the three of them combined have dropped to make up only about 33% of it. That other 50% of acreage is coming mostly from wildfire, but all of the newer varieties are coming out with very good winter hardiness and yield potential. So Vortex, Cold Front, Overdrive, and Gold Rush are all kind of taking the place of Emerson, Gateway, and Elevate. Speaking a bit more to winter hardiness, I personally think this is the most important variety trait, as every other characteristic doesn't really matter if your crop doesn't survive the winter. The big focus on winter hardiness has been actually in breeding recently, as the top 5 varieties there have a very good rating, which is the highest rating you can get, and were registered in the last 8 years. And of that, I believe Cold Front, Overdrive, and Vortex were in the last 3 years. And the difference between very good and good might not sound like much, but when faced with winter kill conditions, it can be the difference between reseeding or not reseeding. For example, here was a demo field that ducks had in 2021, which compared Emerson and Wildfire under the same conditions. They were seeded the same day in early September on good height canola stubble with the same fertility on the same half section. The Emerson ended up completely winter killing, while the Wildfire was one of the nicer fields I scouted that year. So especially if you get a low snow year or a harder winter, it can make a huge difference. So getting into varieties, the first one is Wildfire, very identifiable, close to harvest with this beautiful bronze-colored wheat head. Wildfire is currently around half of the winter wheat grown in Manitoba, and it's a great variety for the province. It's got good yields in protein. It was previously the highest yielding winter wheat until Cold Front came on the market. It's rated very good for winter hardiness, as almost all of those newer varieties are. And it is a bit taller, so it can be prone to lodging. And it's also susceptible to stem rust, which has spores that overwinter in the southern states and are blown north with winds. Preventative fungicides can help with this, but due to the timing of most infections for winter wheat anyways, it happens after flowering, where yield is less severely affected. And also, this is a later maturing variety, as often your spring wheat will end up harvested before it. Cold Front is the next variety that's kind of making a good name for itself, as the last couple of years it's been the new highest yielding variety with consistent 100+ bushel per acre potential. On top of yield, it's also pretty well rounded, as it has very good winter hardiness and it's resistant to all rusts. One potential knock on it is that it's rated intermediate for fusarium head blight, while most of the other newer varieties are at least moderately resistant. And I know in some of the McVet trials, I think Hamiota a couple of years ended up having very high levels of fusarium and Dawn, which can be a knock if we ever get a really wet year and maybe aren't spraying a fungicide on the field. Otherwise, it's slightly shorter than Wildfire with medium maturity, so we should be seeing lots more of this across the province in coming years. Vortex is a newer variety from Alliance Seeds, and it's a bit of a jack of all trades variety that was bred to be an Emerson replacement. It's good yielding with higher protein than average, has very good winter hardiness, and is moderately resistant to fusarium head blight. It's also resistant to all rusts with medium maturity and slightly shorter, so it's got good standability. This picture on the screen is taken from our nitrogen fertility trial at Arberg, and the left plot is a check, I believe, and the right plot was a higher end treatment. But then you can see Wildfire is on the edges of every side of the screen, and it's much taller than the Vortex is there. Overall, this one's an excellent, consistent variety for Manitoba. Overdrive is a new variety for 2024 with very few site years in the McVet trials, so it shows up a little bit lower yielding. But in Rob Graff's research at Lethbridge, it was as high yielding as Wildfire. It's got very good winter hardiness, moderately resistant for fusarium head blight, probably the best disease resistance package, as it's resistant to all rusts, bunt, and even some resistance to the wheat curl mite. And the best part of this variety is actually its early maturity, as it's nearly 1 week earlier than Wildfire. This picture was taken on June 13th, and you can see it had already started heading out. And it's also very short with strong straw, as Elmer Caskew is in the background of that photo, and this crop is just up to his knees at this point. And this one kind of checks all the boxes for Manitoba and should be a good variety going forward. Lastly, I'll cover an old standard in Emerson. It has decent yields across the most site years of any variety in the McVet trials, and the best protein of any variety available. It isn't as winter hardy as any other variety discussed, but it is rated resistant to fusarium head blight, which no other wheat can say at all. So that's a huge positive for it. And otherwise, it's medium maturity, so it's and about as tall as wildfire. And personally, it's not my favorite variety just because it can sometimes struggle to survive the winter. But if you make it through the winter, all of its other traits are pretty solid. So once you've picked out your variety, you need to find a harvested field to be seeding it into. Stubble should be something taller with good snow catchability, and you're probably going to be looking at something that is harvested in late August or early September. Otherwise, it gets too late into the year and you're focused on harvest, not seeding. Canola is the most common one or stubble to be seeding into. It's about 60 to 70% of winter wheat fields being seeded into canola stubble. But canolas are having more straight cut varieties that leave the crop out longer in the field and are actually later maturing as well. So a lot of my work is searching for good alternatives. Barley is probably one of the best alternatives that you can find as it's harvested early and has decent stubble height and is a very good relative yield percentage, as you can see from the table in the bottom left there, showing MASC's relative stubble yield response based on what stubble you're seeding into. But with barley, you have to make sure that you're using 2-row barley, as it loses its germ faster than 6-row barley, and that way it's less of a volunteer issue come the following spring. Oats are usually off pretty early with decent stubble height, but with less pre-harvest being done on oats, sometimes they can stay green a little bit longer, or if they're in a swath, it might take a little bit longer to dry down. But still, oats overall are a very good option as well. Peas are one that I've been seeing a lot more of lately, and as they're off very early, so it's usually one of the first fields that you have available to be seeding into, but there is no stubble for snow catch. That being said, I've actually seen really good success with winter wheat and pea stubble, as usually because it's off early, you're seeding very early, and as a result, you end up with a plant that has a bigger crown and is able to survive the winter a bit better, especially if you're in an area that has higher snowfall. And then lastly, just want to mention you should be avoiding spring wheat stubbles due to the wheat streak mosaic virus. There's other options like flax, soybeans, and corn stubble, but usually those are off just a little bit too late. Although I did scout one early silage corn stubble this past year, and it did quite well. It ended up having half decent stubble height. There just isn't as much volume of the height because it's on 30-inch spacing. And for anyone who has any unseeded or fallow acres without any stubble for snow catch, it doesn't mean that you can't sow winter cereal into those. You just kind of need to seed a very winter hardy variety as early as you can, kind of late August, early September, and that'll set you with the best chance for surviving the winter. Getting into seeding date, MASC coverage for seeding for both winter wheat and fall rye starts August 15th and runs 6 weeks until September 25th for full coverage, and then September 30th for a reduced coverage. The ideal seeding window would probably be the last week of August to the second or third week of September, though. And earlier seedings mean bigger plant that has more reserves from the crown to grow back from the following spring. So as soon as you can, the better, but not too soon because that'll give you too much plant matter and it can reduce your chance of surviving the winter. So kind of wait until that last week of August. Don't get started too early. Seed depth. This one's actually been a bit of a thorn in my side as I've been noticing a lot of deeper seedings trying to chase moisture. But really, when you seed a little bit deeper, all that it does is extend the amount of time it takes for that plant to reach the surface and put on leaves, which can help put in root reserves. So as soon as you start going any deeper than an inch, you're just extending the amount of time it takes for the plant to start being able to put reserves to the crown. We've been able to get away with deeper seedings in the last couple of years because we've had some very long, wide open, warm falls, but the ideal seed depth is 3/4 of an inch to an inch. And a lot of people ask me, well, what if it's too dry in the fall to be seeding a winter cereal? Seeds only really need about 3/10 of an inch to a half inch of precipitation to germinate. And we usually have a rain delay or two during harvest time. So Basically get your seed in the bin and then get it into the drill so that at the first good opportunity, you can seed it in shallow. Seeding rate, this is a little old hat for most people at roughly 2 bushels to the acre or 25 to 30 plants per square foot. But if you're seeding it on the earlier side with good conditions, you can usually be on the lower end of that scale. And if you're seeding later, you're going to want to seed heavier to compensate for some of those plants probably not making it through the winter. Also, this fall, we're starting a 2-year seeding rate trial at the diversification centers. So stay tuned for any updates coming from that. Getting into fertility, this is just a depiction of a typical Manitoba spring where you're either mucking the urea on and leaving ruts, or it's so dry that you're wondering when it'll rain before the agrotane wears off. For nitrogen, the best advice that I've got would be to get 50% of it down in the fall time. As like that last slide depicted, spring application can be difficult, either being too wet to get on the field or too dry for the nitrogen to reach the plant roots. And early nitrogen is very critical in the springtime, as the winter wheat seed head is produced by about the 5th leaf stage, which happens in mid-May. So if you are applying after that, the yield has kind of already been determined, and most of the nitrogen will just go towards protein, and we currently aren't really getting premiums for high protein winter wheat. Phosphorus and potassium are very important as well, as winter cereals make 2 seedlings, both in cold ground, and those nutrients are immobile and less available in cold soils. So definitely put lots of phos close to the seed and have good background potassium levels as well. Lighter sandy land, it's important to watch your copper levels, because if you see any pigtailing of leaves, that can mean a micronutrient application may be warranted, and I've seen that in a couple of fields. And I probably sound like a broken record to most people, but soil tests so that you know exactly what you've got available. It can save you some money on fertilizer when it's as expensive as it is, and you can catch a deficiency before a field becomes a train wreck. Getting into a little bit of research that we've done. This was our nitrogen fertility research, and it's pretty easy to spot the lower end treatments and the higher end treatments in those pictures. This had rates anywhere from no applied N to 160 pounds per acre. And all of the treatments were split applied, 50-50 fall banded versus spring broadcast, except there was one 100% spring broadcast treatment of 110 pounds of N per acre. We did 2 different varieties in this trial, Wildfire and Vortex, so it was a bit like our own mini McVet trial. And I don't have harvest data for this year yet, as this is the final year of a 3-year trial, but I can speak about the 2022 and 2023 data. 2022, for those who recall, was an extremely wet spring, and with that much moisture, there is always potential for nitrogen leaching, especially for the fall applied nitrogen. In 2022, the 100% spring applied treatment did very well and was the highest yielding and highest protein treatment at both Melita and Roblin. That being said, it still performed as well as any of the split applied treatments when all the sites were combined. Flipping the script into 2023 was an extremely dry season with only about 50 to 60% of normal moisture. And as a result, the 100% spring applied treatment suffered, as there was not enough moisture to make it plant available by that 5th leaf stage. Due to this, it yielded less than all of the 80 pounds per acre split applied and even half of the 55 pounds per acre split applied. And the 110 pound per acre split applied treatment, which had the exact same amount of nitrogen, was about 5 bushels per acre higher yielding than the spring applied one. Pretty crazy to see, but personally, I don't think that you'll see a huge yield difference just by doing a split nitrogen application like we saw in 2023. But I do believe that splitting your application reduces your risk and your stress. As in dry years, anybody's guess when that nitrogen will get rain and become plant available. And in wet years, it can be difficult to access the field to spread the nitrogen early before that 5th leaf stage. Also, a couple of interesting things from this. The highest applied nitrogen treatment of 160 pounds per acre was never actually the highest yielding in any of the 8 sites so far, which is pretty crazy. And the Wildfire was consistently about 3 bushels per acre better than Vortex, but Vortex was consistently about 1% higher on protein and higher test weight. And if you're curious about what nitrogen practice is best for you on your farm, Manitoba Crop Alliance is looking for people to do research on the farm trials in winter wheat for both nitrogen timing and seeding rates. It's pretty straightforward with 3 treatments replicated 4 times, and they help you with all of the trial setup and getting going. So if you're interested in either of those, please contact Jordan or Madison. Another newer trial was our nitrous oxide emissions trial, which compares 5 different application types, anywhere from 100% fall banded untreated urea to 100% spring broadcast with an inhibitor and a mix of the two. The graph below shows preliminary data at the Melita site. As you can see, big spikes during spring thaw and rainfall events. I should also mention that these little anchors up here, that's what you pound into the ground, and then you collect the air from that, put it in syringes, send it off to AAFC, who we have a partnership on this trial with, and then they can tell you what the nitrous oxide is from that. So pretty labor intensive, but it's been good that the diversification centers have been willing to work with us on that. So far, the lowest emitter is the Czech that has no applied N, and the highest has been the 100% fall banded urea at seeding. And as you can see from the graph there with the lines, colored lines there being reduced at different amounts, adding an inhibitor really helps reduce emissions. And compared to Melita, I believe both Roblin and Arberg saw even larger N2O decreases at their sites. So pretty promising. And just to wrap up, one thing that I run is a winter wheat program, which pays producers $20 an acre up to 250 acres, plus a free soil test from Western Ag Solutions and agronomic advice from seeding to harvest. The reason that Ducks supports winter wheat is it's about 24 times more productive for waterfowl than a spring seeded cereal, and as it offers very good nesting habitat. Eligible areas for this program are in southwestern Manitoba, where there's a higher density of pothole sloughs. But if you're interested, I put the link to our website below for more information, or you can contact myself. And that was kind of everything I had for today. So if there's any questions, I could take those now.
Okay, thanks, Alex. There's a few questions. First one, I guess, what are you hearing about fusarium levels in winter wheat this year? I guess you mentioned that levels were there, but so what are you hearing?
Yeah, it's actually been pretty decent. I think it was more because the conditions were so conducive for good fusarium development. Most people sprayed for it. And as a result, that actually kind of helped quite a bit or covered most of the bases there. I haven't heard of anyone who's had such a train wreck that they have unsaleable seed by any means, but I think it's going to be a lot more like number 2 wheats than number 1s, but I've still been hearing people having pretty good quality wheat coming off. So far, nothing too crazy.
Okay, and then kind of continuing with that, how about protein in winter wheat? Is it important? I see you had 11.8. Do we need higher, or I guess your comments on protein in winter wheat?
Yeah, protein is a frustrating one for me because depending on what market you're going into, I know if you're selling it for grain and milling, it only needs to be above 11% protein. But if you had a 13 or a 14% protein, you're probably not really being fairly compensated for it. So protein is kind of a frustrating one, as most people are getting above 11%. And a general rule of thumb is if you're not at or around 11.5%, you were probably a little light on your nitrogen. But yeah, that's kind of the general things for protein there. It's been pretty good from what I've heard, and nobody's been sitting with anything below 11 or below 10 that would be cause for concern.
Okay, and I actually got this question a couple of days ago. So what market is it sold into? Is it sold into the Western Red, or is it a feed market, or what is it?
Kind of a mix of everything, actually. Like there is a pretty good milling market. I know I've worked with Parrish and Heinbrecher a fair bit, and I believe that the market that they sell it into goes to the UK, and it's with Kraft, so it ends up making like KD and noodles and things like that. But a lot of the times, the regular milling ends up being blended off to make a half decent loaf of bread, as any other milling market would. But a lot of winter wheat ends up in the feed market as well, as it's just a great ration for hog barns and chickens and things like that.
Okay, and I think you talked about field selection. Can plants get too big before fall?
Yes, I have actually seen that happen. And one of the big risks that happens when your plants get too big, which is kind of why I like to wait until about August 23rd or so before seeding a field, even though MASC covers at August 15th and anything past that. Yeah, I've seen people that have seeded a field very early, and then we've had a long, warm fall where we didn't have like a hard frost or any snow come until almost November. And what happens there is you can basically get too big of a plant. They can almost be touching the adjacent rows that are there, and it makes it very susceptible to snow mold. And that'll just kind of lessen your plant coming out of the spring. And it also makes it more susceptible to just general winter kill. So ideally, that's why we kind of recommend that last week of August, first couple of weeks of September seeding, because any sooner than that, and you're just kind of reducing your chances of surviving a winter by having too big of a plant.
Okay, and this is kind of related. What if the seeds don't germinate in the fall? What is your experience for crop survival?
Actually, great question. And it's not as bad as you'd expect. I've seen a lot of fields where they germinated but didn't actually emerge. And what happens there is they still go through that vernalization period where they can start to make grain the following spring. So as long as you get decent moisture coming out of spring, which since these are planted so early or in the ground already, they can take advantage of snow melt. It actually ends up filling in those areas pretty good. My only knock on that would be it might take a little bit more time than just a crown coming out of the ground for the seed to actually make it. And it does lessen the winter survival chance, I guess, but not so significantly that you should be ripping up or reseeding the entire field. Just kind of be patient with those spots and make sure to take careful note of it the following spring if there's any areas that don't germinate in the fall.
Okay, and as a producer that farms lots of acres, have you seen any downfalls of applying all of the nutrients in the fall?
Good question. I've actually worked with a couple of guys who have done that, and I'd say most years you can probably get away with it. The only issue would be if you have a very, very wet spring like we did this year, and let's say you applied 100 pounds of nitrogen in the fall time, but come the spring, there's only 60 or 70 of that there because of some leaching. Then you might actually have to rush and do another top up, and you've already paid a big price for putting that nitrogen on in the fall, and you're not kind of seeing that return. So that would be my only concern. I will mention that for crops like fall rye, because they actually head out even earlier than winter wheat does, it's actually more commonplace to be applying 100% of your fertility in the fall time. So winter wheat, I preferred going that split application route just because I think it kind of balances your risk hitting both of the good things of adding in the fall and having a little bit in the spring. But for something like fall rye, especially the hybrids, I've heard that people prefer those to be 100% down in the fall.
Okay, and you did mention something here. It says about resistance to one variety. You said it has resistance to wheat curl mite. Could you explain the wheat curl mite and why the resistance?
Sure. So that one, I was looking at the tech bulletin for that variety. That's Overdrive, and it was in Rob Graff's original proposal for the variety, but it didn't actually make the tech bulletin. But the wheat curl mite, it basically carries, or it's the vector for wheat streak mosaic, which is extremely detrimental for winter wheat. And basically, it's this tiny mite that survives on ditches and roadsides or any other grasses, but preferentially it would prefer winter wheat. And kind of the issue is that if you say we're using a spring wheat stubble and then seeding winter wheat into it, if you kind of didn't take care of the green bridge, which is making sure that there's no living plants for about a week, maybe 10 days is even better for that mite to survive on, then you can have it infect your plant very early on. And those infected plants, especially if they're infected before heading out, have huge, like dramatic, almost 100% yield reductions in the field. So that's kind of why it's important to know what stubble you're seeding into and take care of that green bridge. But it's also nice to have a little bit of that resistance. I believe Elevate was another variety that used to have that resistance as well, but it's not as commonly grown nowadays.
Okay, and while I have you on, and Ann Kirk is on as well, I'm gonna just ask a question about fall rye. I had a couple questions in the last couple days here regarding seeding fall rye, and I guess the difference between the hybrids and the open pollinated. If any of you would want to maybe make a comment there as to the biggest difference, I guess, between the two of those.
Yeah, I can cover that one, Lionel. I actually had time this morning, so I quickly whipped up a very short slide on this. But basically, your open pollinated varieties, the most common one you'd be seeing would be Hazlitt. And then hybrids, there's lots of new ones like Receptor or Serafino, Trebbiano, common ones that you see like that. And they are on average probably about 20%, maybe 30% higher yielding. These are some McVet data coming from it. So about an additional 20 bushels compared to Hazlitt. But they also are not cheap. I know you buy them by the unit, and the cost of that, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think it would probably be more than what canola seed is nowadays. So you kind of have to make that decision for yourself if that additional 20% yield is worth the additional cost of the seed. But depending on your markets and where you find it, they can be very good. They've got better falling numbers, shorter height, and are harvested even a little bit earlier. So, and they can really pack on the bushels.
Okay, you mentioned you buy it by the unit. So what's the unit?
Oh, I believe a unit is 1 million seeds. And the last time that I was working with hybrid fall rye, you seeded 800,000 seeds, or like 0.8 of a unit to the acre. I'm not sure if those numbers have changed since, if they're wanting you to seed closer to a full unit to the acre. But yeah, that's definitely a little bit different than the targeted 20 plants per square foot for an open pollinated rye.
Okay, so that's like a lot of producers. Well, producers work in bushels per acre basically when they're looking at seeding rates, or have been doing that. So would that convert to X amount of bushels per acre, or um, any thoughts there, or kind of what is the recommended seeding rate? What has been, I guess, the recommended seeding rate for fall rye?
You know, I might actually toss that one to Anne because off the top of my head, I don't fully know that, but maybe Anne would have it handy.
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that conversation. Were you talking about for hybrid fall rye or open pollinated or both?
I guess we were talking a bit about, first of all, kind of describing what a unit is, and then a lot of the producers, at least a lot of producers that I get questions from, are always talking and seeding at bushels per acre. So how would a unit kind of convert to, or what is the, the old way of seeding fall rye? How many bushels per acre should you be, or were you normally looking at?
Sure. So for hybrid fall rye, as Alex mentioned, and open pollinated, two kind of different management practices. In for open pollinated fall, yes, for open pollinated fall rye, we're looking at about a bushel per acre to 1.5 bushels per acre seeding rate. So a bit lower than something like than say spring wheat. Yeah, so about a bushel to a bushel and a half. For open pollinated, I would have to double check. It is a bit more confusing, and as Alex mentioned, people sell it in units based on like a million seed rate. So I don't know that number offhand about the recommended seeding rate for the open pollinated um, rye. Or sorry, it's tricky to get the term straight for the hybrid rye. So yeah, I would have to get back to that.
Okay. And so the 20% is the question I had yesterday was the producer got a price on the open pollinated rye, and he called me and just said that he couldn't believe how expensive it was. And he was wondering if the yield increase that they promote is consistent, because they were talking, well, like you were saying, Alex, about like a 20 bushel increase in yields. So how consistent is that, I guess, as he was wondering?
I think that yield increase is fairly consistent. I do think that we are still seeing a lot of open pollinated fall rye varieties being grown, like Hazlitt, for example, has been quite popular for a number of years. So I think that producers are kind of determining whether or not those increased seeding costs and also potentially higher nitrogen rates required for the hybrid fall rye are worth it economically. So we are seeing a lot of the older fall rye varieties still being popular and planted. And I think that might just reflect some of those lower seeding costs. And you know, it would kind of be up to a farmer to do some math and kind of figure out how much actual extra yield you need to pay for those higher seeding costs and potentially higher nitrogen rates. So that is something that would be good to look at for the future.
Okay. The producer I talked to, when we got talking into it, he was looking at Hazlitt as well, and he was, I guess, one of the comments was that it grows taller, and you can, maybe experience some lodging difficulties and stuff. He was wondering about a growth regulator. Anne, have you heard anything about growth regulator use or on fall rye or?
No, I actually haven't heard anything about growth regulator use on fall rye. That would also be something interesting to consider, because yeah, you definitely see, like in our McVet trials, for example, you definitely see a big height difference between some of those older varieties and some of the newer hybrid varieties. And I do just now did find the actual recommended seeding rates for the hybrid rye. So most of the time they're recommending about 0.8 units per acre. So 1 unit would be 1,000,000 seeds per acre. So 0.8 would be 800,000 seeds per acre. And that translates into about 18.5 seeds per square foot. So that would be kind of the recommended seeding rate. And we are going for that would be lower than, say, an open pollinated fall rye, assuming people are assuming that those hybrid ryes do have better capacity to tiller and might do better in a lower seeding rate situation.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for the presentation, Alex, and for your input at the end here. That was great. I'm going to grab the screen back and go through the rest of the presentation for today. Just wanted to start talking a bit about, I guess, where we're sitting right now. This is in the crop report that came out yesterday. So if you're interested in reading the full report, go to the Manitoba Ag website, and it'll be under the crop report. So, but anyways, looking through the province right now, where winter wheat, I guess, like Alex had mentioned, we're getting close to most of it being done right now. Maybe in the Northwest, a little bit, few more acres to come off, but in average, about 87% of the winter wheat crop that's come off is come off already. And I agree with Alex. Most of the reports I've been hearing so far are pretty good, and quality's been good as well. Fall rye, again, 87% across the region, and it looks like the Northwest and the Interlake are kind of a little bit behind. Biggest reason there is probably because of the rainfall and some of the rain events we've had lately that have gone through that area. And I think a lot of producers are probably just nicely getting back into the field this week. So we could probably see some of those acres be knocked off fairly quickly, as long as it doesn't rain again here. Spring wheat, 13% across the province. I think when you look in the Southwest, it's the southern part of the province that's got more of the acres, or the largest percentage of the acres done, but and then the central region. And well, that makes sense, because the central region was kind of off to an early start this year with all the seeding, and just throughout the whole growing season was ahead of the pack. So again, the Northwest and the Interlake area is a little bit farther behind, but again, mainly because of the rainfall. Otherwise, I think they would be up in that the kind of the 10 to 15% range. Barley, I think the people started going into barley here the last little while, and one of the main reasons for that is we've been seeing a lot of the barley starting to break down, a lot of the heads starting to bend right over. I think producers were a little bit concerned about losing some of the yield to winds and shelling or weather events. So I think a lot of producers might have even left the wheat and went into the barley to try to get some of it done. So that's why the percentage there is probably a little bit higher. And oats, I think, is always, maybe sowing a little bit later this year. So it's 6% done. And again, producers just nicely getting started. The percentage of peas done, kind of a little bit surprising by this time. We're only 60% done, but I think, again, the weather has been a little bit of an issue there. I think recent rainfalls have kept them greener longer. I think some of the fields got a little bit dirtier on some producers with a lot of growth of weeds and volunteer canola in a lot of places. So it took a little longer for that to dry down. I think now what's holding it off is the ground is wet for a lot of producers. So our harvesting time is slowed down quite a bit. We're not getting started till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in some places, and then shutting down once the sun goes down, because it doesn't take long for the ground to get really moist again and make for difficult conditions. Canola harvest, that 10% done, and so for overall for the province, we're about 8% complete right now. So again, we're just nicely getting going. I mentioned a few things about peas. The wet conditions are making it harder, as I mentioned. There's actually a couple guys I even seen that are trying to maybe do some swathing in front of it and trying to just make it easier for the combines to go through. But I think in general, I think most producers are just trying to wait it out and get the crop off. Quality seems to be not bad as long as you're not pushing it.
Sorry about that, everyone. I think we lost Lionel's audio. Just give him a minute to come back on. Sometimes this can happen. There we go. There we go. Excuse me, Lionel. Sorry, I think we just lost your audio for a tiny bit, but you can just carry on there.
Weather has caused a lot. Hi, Lori.
Hi. Are you hearing me, Lionel?
Yeah, I just lost everything, and then it went back to Zoom and came back. So looks like everybody's still on, right?
You bet. Yeah, if you want to just pick it up, we just kind of lost a little bit there for a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, carry on right here is good.
Okay. Sorry about that. It looks like just kind of lost things for a second. But anyways, I was talking a bit about the quality of the wheat, and the wheat quality is looking pretty much the same. I don't think it's changed a lot yet. Biggest thing right now, our biggest concern for producers in some of the areas where they receive some high winds on the weekend, where there's severe lodging in places now. So I think we might be seeing some quality issues in those areas. But I think in general, we're staying right about where we've been. There's just a couple of pictures of some of the lodging that happened over the last two weather events that went through some of the area. These would be located more in that Foxwarren area and right through to basically Hamiota and up north to Russell area. So you can see a lot of the crop tangled and down. A lot of this crop is probably not going to come back up. So it's going to be difficult for producers to, if it hadn't had a pre-harvest on it yet, it'll be difficult to get that pre-harvest to work as well as everybody was hoping it would work. And the producers are talking a lot more about swathing, and I have seen swathers pulled out and sitting in yards in the last couple of days. So I think we might see a little bit more swathing. Even some of the canola crops have been tangled up pretty good. So I think we might see a lot more swathing in some of these areas than we normally would see. So I guess with that, that's pretty much everything I had for an update for today on crops. As I mentioned, we didn't have any other questions for the crop scouting panel. I wanted to put this up safe grain storage for wheat and canola. As we get into this time of year, producers are wanting to get out into the field and get crop in. So this is always a good chart to have as to kind of the grain temperature and moisture, and then how many days you kind of have before you need to be doing something with it in the bin. And so just a good tool to have at your side as you're harvesting, especially if you're running out of bin space or running out of air space for your grain and you want to keep going. Some of the slides to end the day today, the Manitoba Hay Listing Service. Again, if you've got hay for sale, definitely get it on there. It does get lots of hits, so get it on there and get it sold. The crop residue burning authorization is in effect. And so if you're looking at birding, check the website and make sure that your area is able to burn. And if not, you'll need a permit. Our MASC offices. So if you got any questions regarding your insurance for this year, give them a call. And my contact information and Lori's contact information. So if you have any questions or any requests for upcoming crop talks, please feel free to give us a call. Thanks for attending and see you next week.